Have you ever thought about this? If one habit helps you sleep better, and another makes you sharper every day, then why, when combined, could they end up destroying millions of brain cells after the age of 65? My name is Walter. I am 74 years old. I used to be an architect, and I've always been meticulous, both in my work and in my personal life. Every evening, I dedicate a good amount of time to studying aging. I try to understand what I should and should not do to protect my health, stay relaxed, and grow old with confidence, especially when it comes to heart health and brain function. I truly believed I was doing the right thing for my brain, until last Tuesday night. That night, I was reviewing an old blueprint I had drawn more than 30 years ago, a design I once knew by heart, down to every single line. But this time, I could not make sense of it. It felt like it was drawn by someone else. I stared at the paper for nearly 10 minutes, trying to remember the logic I once had. Nothing came back. I sat there in silence, with a heavy sense of worry creeping in. The next morning, I went to the neurology clinic to meet Dr. Elaine Torres. She is 50 years old and one of the most trusted specialists among my friends. After a few questions and some basic neurological tests, she didn't give me a diagnosis right away. She simply said this: "There are two habits you have been doing quite correctly, but at the wrong time, and when you combine them, they might be harming your brain more than you realize." I froze for a moment. My mind instantly tried to guess which two habits she meant. Elaine must have noticed the confusion in my face because she gently interrupted. "Don't worry, Mr. Walter. You're not the only one. I've spoken with many others and they had the same routines. The good news is every habit can be adjusted, or at the very least, we can find a smarter way to combine them. And if you are wondering what those two seemingly harmless habits are, and why they become dangerous when used together, stay with me until the end, because I will share everything Dr. Elaine revealed to me, and more importantly, the changes I experienced in my brain, after just 3 weeks of doing things differently. I still remember the look on Dr. Elaine's face right after the evaluation that day. She didn't say anything about the brain scan results. She didn't look alarmed or overly serious either. She simply looked at me and asked what seemed like an innocent question. "Mr. Walter, what do you usually do in the evenings before bed?" I was a bit surprised. I came here because of memory concerns, not to talk about my nightly routines. Still, I answered honestly. I have a few simple rituals. I read some health articles and do something relaxing to ease my mind before sleeping. Elaine gave no reaction. She nodded gently and flipped to a page in her notes, as if she had just found the missing piece of a puzzle. At that point, I had no idea that my familiar routine was exactly what had been throwing everything off. You've probably thought that a cup of herbal tea in the evening is the perfect way to wind down. A lot of people believe that. So did I, and I had been doing it for nearly a decade. Every night at exactly 8:30, I would brew a cup of chamomile or valerian tea. Sometimes I added a bit of honey. I placed the cup on a small wooden table beside my reading chair, under the warm yellow glow of the lamp that shone softly across the wall where my 1991 blueprint was framed. I would sit there, sipping slowly, flipping through medical articles written for seniors. That routine made me feel like I was caring for my brain seriously and responsibly. But the truth was, I was wrong. Elaine began going over the test results. She pulled up my brain scan on the monitor. Areas in my frontal lobe and hippocampus appeared faded, like patches of dust hanging in the air. Before I could even make sense of it, she continued. "This is the region responsible for long-term memory and cognitive response, and it's under stress from something that seems harmless." She paused, then asked, "Do you often wake up during the night?" I nodded, almost every night. Once or twice, usually to use the bathroom. I used to think that was normal, maybe even a good sign. It meant I wasn't sleeping too deeply, which could be risky for heart health. But Elaine shook her head. That habit is exactly what's stopping your brain from cleaning itself. She explained the importance of deep sleep. It is the only stage of the night when the nervous system initiates a full cleaning process across the brain. During this phase, cerebrospinal fluid flushes out excess proteins, especially beta amyloid. That is the toxic waste linked to memory loss and Alzheimer's disease. And the part that shocked me the most was this. If you get interrupted just 2 or 3 times a night, this process can lose up to 30% of its effectiveness. That figure comes directly from Mayo Clinic. Elaine looked straight at me. Her voice was calm but sharp enough to send a chill down my spine. If you drink tea after 8 o'clock, your body will need to eliminate it over the next 2 or 3 hours. And if that causes you to wake up around 1 or 2 in the morning, you just pulled yourself out of deep sleep. That is the most critical window your brain needs to survive. I sat there, frozen. The tea I had treasured every night. The one I thought was helping me drift gently into sleep. It had become the very thing that made me sleep without healing. It didn't cause insomnia, but it stole my chance to restore. I swallowed hard. I felt like a student who had just discovered they had been answering the same question wrong for decades without knowing. Elaine added gently, "You don't need to give it up. Just shift the timing. Drink it before 7. Or switch to a type that is less diuretic. After the age of 65, your brain doesn't need more stimulation. It needs space to rest properly." I said nothing. I sat there in silence, staring at the faint image of my brain scan still glowing on the screen. A single cup of tea, something I had trusted every night, was quietly dismantling my brain's ability to recover. Just as I was about to stand up, Elaine tilted her head slightly toward me. Her voice was soft but steady. "Mr. Walter, I believe there is another habit you've been doing each night. It is not harmful if done correctly, but if the timing is wrong, it could be even worse than drinking tea too late." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Elaine looked at me slowly, then asked, "After drinking tea, what do you usually do next?" I answered without hesitation. I read research papers, medical journals, geriatric studies, or anything related to memory science. I thought it was important to keep my brain trained every day. Elaine didn't look surprised. She nodded, as if she had expected that answer all along. "That is exactly the issue, Mr. Walter. When your brain is still processing heavy information right before bedtime, it cannot shift into deep rest." That night when I returned home, I sat down in my study. It had always been my safe space in the evenings. But this time I didn't brew tea. I didn't pick up a book. I just sat there, quietly observing myself from a different perspective. And then I understood. For more than 10 years, I had built an evening ritual that I thought was healthy. A cup of tea to relax, then some reading to keep my mind active. But in reality, I was forcing my brain to stay switched on all the time. Elaine called it silent neural stress. On the outside, everything seems calm. But inside, the brain is still running at full speed. She explained that reading technical material, analyzing data, or reasoning through complex information, especially in medical or scientific fields, triggers the prefrontal cortex to stay active. That region is responsible for decision-making and memory. Your brain needs time to cool down, just like machines need to lower temperature before shutting off. If you push your brain until the very last minute, then flip the lights off and try to sleep, it gets stuck in a strange state. Not fully alert, but not fully able to enter deep sleep either. She told me about a study from the Sleep Disorders Center at Stanford. People over 65 who regularly process complex information within an hour of bedtime have a 38% higher risk of memory decline within the next 5 years. I swallowed hard. I had always prided myself on being disciplined, thoughtful, and informed. But here I was, pushing my brain past its limits, every single night. Elaine rested her hand gently on her notebook and spoke with quiet understanding. Caring for your memory is not like lifting weights. It doesn't need hard work. It needs smart recovery. And in the evening, especially after 8 o'clock, it is not time to train your brain. It is time to bring it into stillness. That night, for the first time in nearly a decade, I did not read before bed. I closed the curtains early. I played some soft instrumental music, and I just sat there in silence for a few minutes. I closed my eyes without reviewing any studies. I let go of every diagram in my head, and I slept, straight through the night. No dreams. No waking up at 2 in the morning. No feeling of mental fog in the morning. It was the first night I truly felt like I had done something right for my brain. And the first night I realized this. Even good things, if done at the wrong time, can become a burden. I used to believe that if every habit I practiced was good on its own, then combining them would surely double the benefit. Like eating vegetables is good. Walking in the morning is good. So eating vegetables while walking must be even better. But what Elaine showed me was the complete opposite. Mr. Walter, the problem is not with each habit. Both drinking tea and training your memory are beneficial on their own. But when you combine them in the same time frame, your brain no longer has the capacity to recover. She spoke like someone who had seen this too many times. Her tone was calm, but her words sent a chill through me. Imagine this, she said. You drink a cup of herbal tea at 8:30. For the next 2 to 3 hours, your excretory system goes to work, preparing to eliminate fluid. If you go to bed at 10, then just when your brain is about to enter deep sleep, you wake up at 1 or 2 in the morning to use the bathroom. At the same time, right before bed, you have just activated your prefrontal cortex by reading, analyzing, and trying to memorize complex information. When you lie down, your brain is still spinning like a machine that has not cooled down. Instead of diving into deep sleep, it gets stuck in a shallow stage of sleep. And now you have a perfect formula for mental decline. Elaine was not exaggerating. She showed me data from a study conducted by the National Institutes of Health. People over 65 who have fragmented sleep without enough continuous deep sleep have a 43% higher risk of memory loss compared to those who maintain stable deep sleep. I looked at the numbers, but in my mind, only one thought echoed. I had locked the door to my bedroom, but I had opened the door to aging. The problem was not the tea. It was not the book. It was that I had forced my brain to face two opposing demands at the same time. On one side, it was being soothed for sleep. On the other, it was being pushed to work and memorize. What was the result? It could not do either job well. It was not alert enough to learn and not calm enough to recover. Elaine compared it to a biological feedback loop. When you lack deep sleep, your ability to regulate stress hormones, especially cortisol, becomes unstable. Elevated cortisol makes you wake more easily, feel more irritable, lose memory faster, and even experience nighttime spikes in blood pressure. That cycle keeps repeating itself without you ever realizing it. I could not help but feel a shiver down my spine. Each night I thought I was taking care of myself, but in truth, I had been setting up a silent self-destruction protocol. And no one had warned me. A cup of tea, a single book. No one would expect these two harmless things to join forces and become the most silent destroyers of the aging brain. I returned to the clinic after 3 weeks, right on schedule. Elaine looked at me from behind her computer screen and smiled. Did you try making the adjustments? I nodded, and for the first time in many years I smiled back. A real smile, one that was genuine and easy. I told her everything. I still drank tea every evening, but no longer after 8 o'clock. I moved it to 6:30, right after dinner. I chose lavender or licorice tea instead of valerian, which I realized made me need to urinate more than I expected. Afterward, I no longer read technical books. Instead, I listened to instrumental music, usually soft jazz, or sometimes just the steady sound of rain playing from a small speaker in the corner of the room. I still loved books, but instead of analyzing scientific papers, I switched to reading light quotes during the day when my brain was alert and ready to engage. I also kept a fixed bedtime at 10 o'clock, not earlier, not later. At first, my body resisted, but after just a few days, something strange began to happen. I stopped waking up in the middle of the night. No more tossing and turning. No more chaotic dreams, just full sleep. The kind that felt complete. Elaine nodded, as if that was exactly what she had hoped for. Deep sleep is not just the result of what we do. It is also the result of what we avoid doing at the wrong time. Then she opened my most recent brain scan. Compared to the first one, the gray areas were now slightly brighter. Not perfect, but clearly improved. And I knew that the real value was not in the image on the screen. It was in how I felt every morning, clear, calm, and more trusting of my own memory. Elaine gently placed her hand on my shoulder and said, "You do not have to give up the things you love. You just need to treat your brain the way you treated every blueprint you ever created. Respect the principles, understand the system, and put the right pieces in the right place at the right time." I left the clinic that day without a prescription. Instead, I carried home a new user manual for myself, one that no one had ever handed me in over 70 years of life. I know you have heard a lot of advice about aging and brain health, but if I could leave you with just 3 things after this video, they would be these. First, take another look at when you drink tea each evening. It may not be the cause, but it is very likely the trigger that makes your sleep more fragile. Second, give your brain a chance to unplug at the right time. Do not keep reading. Do not keep thinking. Do not try to memorize anything too close to bedtime. Your brain needs time to wind down at the end of the day. And third, the most harmless mistake of all is when we combine 2 good habits at the wrong moment. They do not add up into benefits. They multiply into damage. After age 65, each night of poor sleep could be a night your brain cells never recover from. Tonight, do not do anything dramatic. Just try drinking your tea a little earlier. Close the book at 8:30. Go to bed on time. Your brain will thank you in the morning with a clarity you may have forgotten was even possible. And if you think habits are the only reason memory starts to fade, you are in for a surprise. There is a silent vitamin deficiency that almost no one talks about, but it is one of the most dangerous memory killers after 60. I had it once, and I paid for it with some of the most precious memories I had. Let's uncover the truth together in the next video. The hidden vitamin deficiency that destroys memory after 60.